This presentation, I call it criteria-based communication culture. Our company is a relatively young company, but it was formed out of a number of industry veterans from different companies, such as Amazon, Riot, AMD, and also by a lot of community members and modders. And so we had this very kind of disparate group of people with very different backgrounds, and that led to a lot of problems early on, unsurprisingly, especially in the way that we communicated. And over the past 5 years, we really learned a lot about the effect that communication has on creating a company's culture. And we came up with a few interesting techniques of our own for how to develop a stronger company culture through a really clear communication style that was more or less based on game design. So that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. Like I said, if you got questions, just raise your hand. If I'm going to get to it later, I'll just say, I'm going to cover that in a few minutes. Yeah. So first, let's talk a little bit about some stats on company culture. Company culture is one of the most kind of, I'd say, misunderstood aspects of almost every industry. These stats are all from the US, but 94% of executives believe they need a distinct culture. 28% say that they understand their own corporate culture. It's something that everybody kind of understands is important. Your employees are far and away your most valuable resource, but nobody knows exactly what it means or how to make it. Another thing that I love, and this is kind of how we deceive ourselves as executives. I'm assuming, are most of the people here kind of studio owners, leads, executives? Raise your hand. No, not so much? Okay. Okay, well, we executives, I'm a co-founder and president of Sunspear Games, and we always think that we're a lot smarter than our employees, and we're absolutely wrong. So we always convince ourselves, because we try really hard to make good company culture, we're like, yeah, we did such a great job, and the employees don't necessarily agree. Which leads to some issues between management and the employees. We think we're trying all of these things. We can't understand why they're still not happy, so some jokes get made. One of my favorite jokes is a guy goes up to a CEO and says, hey, how many people work at your company? And the CEO responds, about half of them. And it's a funny way of underscoring a more important point, which is that a lack of company culture, a lack of clear communication, and unhappy employees, which is generally what that becomes, really hurts the productivity of your company. In the US alone, unhappy employees cost US companies around $300 billion a year, which is about half the overall GDP of Poland. So it's an expensive mistake to make. So what exactly is it? These are various things that I've heard people tell me are key parts of their company's culture. Unlimited paid time off isn't actually a part of your company's culture. That's a perk. Perks and culture, two very different things. Oftentimes people confuse them with the same thing. If the unlimited paid time off comes from a culture of mental health for your employees, then the culture of caring about your employees' mental health, that's the actual company culture aspect. Other than that, they're just perks. And this is something we see a lot of, especially in the US, is these kind of, I call it copycat cultures, where one company does something, that company starts to be very successful because the culture is very positive. Other companies then try to copy the same perks without understanding the cultural reasons behind those perks. And oftentimes they backfire, right? So everyone was like, oh, all of these companies that are like young and hip and with it start giving unlimited paid time off. We should do that too. And then it totally backfires, or it doesn't make the employees happy, or they say that they're going to do it, and they're like, yeah, you can have unlimited paid time off, you're just never allowed to take it, you know, stuff like that. So it doesn't work. Conflict management expectations. Somebody told me this, and I was like, that is one of the best examples of a core aspect of company culture that I've ever heard of. A massive part of company culture, and you're going to hear this from me all presentation, communication and culture, back and forth. Like, they are not one and the same, but the communication and systems of communication at your company play a huge role on the culture of your company. And how you manage conflicts, I mean, when everybody's happy, it's always easy, but how you deal with conflicts and problems and disagreements, that plays a huge role in how your company culture is. Ping pong tables. Same thing. Nope, not company culture. It's a perk. And I like to use this example too. Sometimes companies offer things like ping pong tables and stuff like that, and then their employees aren't happier. And I give the example of, okay, well, if you have a team that's consistently failing to make their deadlines because they aren't receiving clear instruction from senior management, and they're coming down the hall like, I need more help, I need more help, I need more help, and senior management's like, boom, ping pong table. Your employees are going to be like, that isn't actually solving my problem. Okay, a few more. Knowing the company vision. Yep, core part of company culture. What is the corporate vision? You know, it has to be something lived by senior management, not just stated. You can't just be like, oh, our vision is the best thing of all time. And everyone's like, okay, that's pithy and stupid. Most companies have mission statements, but very few employees know them because it's not something that you interact with day to day. A vision should be something that all of the employees really understand. Our CEO was at AMD for about 12 years, and he always says that one of the best things about working at AMD was that every single employee understood their vision. Their vision was Intel. They got all this money, they got all this stuff, they got all those employees, we're going to kill them and take their market share. It doesn't always have to be a nice vision, but it was a singular thing that every single employee from the very top to the very bottom understood and could get behind was, we're going to take those guys down, we're going to eat their lunch. Speaking of lunches, nope. Another perk, and this is actually one that I see a lot of companies do. It's getting increasingly common in the US. It's not necessarily a good thing. Studies have started to show that especially offering free breakfast and dinner as ways of trying to encourage employees to stay late actually hurts their mental health. Employees need to get out of the office from time to time. It's good for them. Conflict avoidance. This is an aspect of company culture, but it's a bad one. Right? If conflicts regularly turn into battles or cause backlash, employees begin to avoid them. That decreases trust, transparency, that really hurts the culture of your company. All of a sudden, you're not hearing about problems because people are just sweeping them under the rug, because conflict avoidance is something that inherently started to happen in the company. This isn't something that anybody necessarily designs for. You don't go like, oh, we're going to have a culture where nobody talks to each other about problems. It's just something that happens because of the way that communication has been happening at the company, and especially the way senior management has treated issues. Asking clarifying questions. This is a core aspect of our company's culture. We said that anytime that there's a conflict, we have very specific phrases and very specific tools that we use in that communication. And it's become so ubiquitously used at our studio that it's effectively become a part of our culture. Okay, so short list of what is culture. Now that we've seen some examples of what it is, what it isn't. Vision, clearly defined sense of where you're going and why. The end destination everyone is working for together. Values, that's the important aspects that you're taking on your journey to that vision. It's the core things that keep the company together, the moral points, the aspects that kind of bind the employees together while they're striving for that same end goal. Norms, and these often end up becoming negative norms instead of positive ones if you don't plan for them. But this is basically the unwritten behaviors that employees showcase to each other. It's a lot of the communication aspects and stuff like that. You'll find that you have all of these different norms in each different circle of your life. You've got certain norms with your family, certain norms with your friends, certain norms at your company. Generally, you don't plan for them. They just kind of happen based on the people and based on the relationships that you have and the communication that you have. But at a company, it's best to try to design them with systems. This is basically how you achieve those norms if you're trying to actually establish positive ones. Couple quotes from employees at top culture companies. Encouraged to be productive without overexerting themselves. Encouraged to take our vacation. Makes sense at a big company like Google. At smaller companies, open and collaborative company culture. Every Friday we have a full company meeting where everyone is updated on the latest and greatest things happening. Obviously that can't happen easily at a company like Google, but does at a company like Drift, which is a conversational marketing company based in Boston. So collaborative company culture, the norms and the systems that they've put in place, and things like having these every Friday meetings have created a culture where everybody feels collaborative. Autonomy and a willingness to help from all. Everyone is trusted to do their job, no micromanaging. High Spot, Seattle-based company. And this is a great example of another aspect of company culture, honesty, trust, right? Okay, so why care? Why is it so important? Well, one of my favorite statistics was a Columbia University study in 2017 showed that the likelihood of job turnover at an organization with high company culture is 13.9% annually, whereas the probability of job turnover in low company cultures is 48.4%. Additionally, in the US, don't know what it is here, but in the US, it costs about a quarter of an annual salary to replace somebody. So if almost 50% of your employees are being swapped out year on year, and you're paying a quarter of an annual salary for each one that you have to then find a new person, train them up, go through that process again, it becomes very costly. Company culture can make productivity feel amazing. I sometimes refer to the paradox of speed, which is when I often talk about patience as one of the core ways that you can create a company culture, right? You can't just tell everyone, okay, we're going to have a culture like this and we're going to communicate like that. It only works if you're very patient with people, because people, just like gamers in our games, take a while to get through the tutorial and kind of figure out exactly what to do and how to use these tools. So you have to be very, very patient with your employees as they're learning these systems. And it can feel very inefficient because it's not super clear how much progress you're making, right? You aren't having your weekly scrum and saying, yeah, we're 60% of the way towards the metric target for company culture, right? It's very hard to define. But it's really, really important. So you kind of have to slow down, especially as senior management. You have to slow things down a little bit and really make sure that the employees are being heard, that the culture is being implemented. Sometimes you got to sit down and have a conversation with an employee for an hour and a half or 2 hours, something like that. And it sounds like a huge waste of our time, especially us executives that like to think that we're very important and very busy, when most of the time we're just running around creating problems for our employees. But what you find is that by taking that time early on, by building that culture of trust and respect early on, it saves a ton of time later. One of the examples that I like to give is actually when I was kind of getting onboarded to this company's culture, because I was like one of the worst people when it came to communication, and I had a lot of bad habits. And one time we're working on RTS, and I said, wait guys, like I've got this great idea for how we can not use team colors, and we're going to make it thematically all better. And they were like, we've already thought about that, we've tried it, it doesn't work. And I was like, no, fuck you. Like, no. Like, you haven't tried it, not the way I am. And so they sat down with me. I got 2 of the designers to sit down with me for an hour and a half. So we used 3 hours of time, and they walked me through the data, they walked me through what they did, they walked me through the whole process, and they said, now, if you have any other points about this that we haven't tried, then we're open to hearing that. And I was like, no, that pretty much covers it. It totally makes sense. And after that, because they took all of that time to really explain to me how much more expert they were at what they were doing than I was, which makes sense. I'm not a game designer. I just had this momentary strike of brilliance and thought I was like all that. Now, if I go, hey guys, did we think about doing something like this? If they tell me, yeah, we tested that in these 3 ways, it didn't work, here's why, then I go, okay. But sometimes they go, actually, we haven't tried it in that way. How cheap will it be to test? Yeah, okay, we can implement and test for that, right? And so we kind of got the system where there's a lot more trust now. So now our conversations become much quicker. I know who to go to, and I trust them to do their jobs because of that early time that we took to practice those behaviors. It can also make productivity absolutely impossible. The negative side of company culture generally comes from politics, as we like to call it in the industry, right? Politics is when people choose their words and actions based on how they want others to react, rather than based on what they really think. Somebody gave me that quote, I forget who, might have been our CEO actually, and I said, that is one of the best definitions of it I've heard, right? It's presenting data in a specific way to achieve a desired result. It's not being honest about it. You have to have raw conversations about raw data with zero malintent. And that's something that's very, very hard unless your company culture has inherent sense of goodwill, buy-in, trust, respect. Can make employees rise to the challenge and feel like they can take on the world, right? I always say that a company with really high company culture, your employees will work overtime with smiles on their faces. They aren't going to resent it. They're going to enjoy doing what they do because they're going to feel like it's meaningful. They're going to feel like their opinions, their decisions, their effort really matters to the company. Or they can resent it. And every time you say, oh, we have to make a pivot, or, oh, we're no longer working on that, we got to do that, then you get the employees throwing up their hands and going, man, like, you're always screwing this up, and it's always a problem, and it's always, right? And that often happens in corporate climates based on fear, a little bit from senior management, right? Oftentimes, I see that in kind of fear, I call them fear-based, it sounds like they're tyrants. It's not really that, it's more like the senior management is really anxious about deadlines. Those deadlines become dreadlines. People are constantly missing them. And everyone has this sense of kind of impending doom over everything that's happening. And sometimes people will stay late and they'll try to get things done. And so sometimes it looks like, oh, this is kind of working. Like we're moving a bit faster for the last couple weeks. But it's a false positive. Fear really inhibits learning, and employees that are afraid for their jobs or to make deadlines because of the interactions they're having with senior management tend to sweep things under the rug or find cheap workarounds to problems instead of really addressing them or solving them in creative ways. They're just trying to kind of cover it up, and it costs you hundreds of hours further down in terms of fixing those problems. Keep teams together and engaged. The employees' overall ratings of their company's qualities like collaboration, work environment, and mission and value alignment are over 20% higher at companies with strong cultures. Collaboration, especially in video games, super, super critical. Having high company culture, great for collaboration. Or it can kill your company. And I do mean this. It's funny, a lot of the things that I'm saying are going to sound super obvious, like employees are people. And you're like, yeah, wow, I paid money to hear this guy say that employees are people. But it's amazing how much we still kind of treat employees like robots. We think of them as separate from their personal needs. When we look at the top things that employees say that they need at work, they sound very similar to personal life needs as well. They say physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. That sounds exactly like what it is in our personal lives. It means adequate rest, exercise and nutrition, feeling seen and valued at work, having the space and time to focus and think creatively. We could have a whole sidebar conversation about how you're having too many meetings. I guarantee you're having too many meetings and too many people are a part of it, and everyone's getting interrupted from their job all the time. People need some time to be able to really focus and be creative. And experiencing a deeper sensation of being a part of something worthwhile. That's where the spiritual well-being comes from as an employee being at a company. And it's why having a clear sense of vision statement that everyone understands and buys into is so valuable. So, how do you get there? Well, it's not easy, and there's no one path. The path that worked for us is probably not the path that's going to work for you, right? We've got all of these big companies constantly copying each other's perks, and we're seeing that it doesn't do a great job. You have to kind of do an internal deep dive on your company's culture and figure out what is the most important thing for what our employees want and need right now. What I can tell you is how we got there, which was an interesting concept that started from a game design problem. So, briefly, Sunspear Origins story. It started when a group of guys, me among them, sat down and said, okay, how would one create the perfect esport? Like, literally, if you had the budget, if it didn't matter what you did, if you blah, 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 blah. And we spent some time, and we did a lot of research, and we came up with the idea that, well, if you could somehow make an RTS that was multiplayer team-based, incredibly accessible, also unsolvably deep, and really good as a spectator experience and heavily social, that would probably be it. It's also probably impossible. But instead of just saying, yeah, that's impossible, we said, okay, well, let's see what we can test out. And so one of the things we did at the very beginning is we went out and we tried to find some of the best RTS designers we could. We found professionals, and we found people from modding communities in StarCraft 2 and other games, guys that were total amateurs, because modders often have a better understanding of the mechanics of games than the actual designers that made them, because they have to in order to tinker with it. So we got 6 RTS designers. And we said, okay, we're gonna really give this a shot. We're gonna see if we can design something. And what happened? Well, everyone came from a different game, a different background, had a different vision. We kind of had a sense of company vision in terms of we're gonna make the best possible RTS esport we can, but everybody had a very different image in their mind of what that end product looked like. And so there were constant squabbles, and production was really slow. There were constant ego battles happening, and we said, okay, we need to create a system that lets us overcome this. We derived it very heavily from various game design systems, and we also brought in a lot of things from marriage counseling, which gives you an idea of how bad the communication was. And we combined it into a system that we later named criteria-based design. All of a sudden, all of our designers had taken the ego out of individual ideas, very much put it in the process of trying to create the best possible response. They were chugging along at lightning speed, coming up with great results. And we said, huh, this is working like way better than we expected. What if we changed it slightly and made it the official system for senior leadership to communicate as well? Because we were still having senior leadership communication issues and stuff like that. We applied it to senior leadership communication, and all of a sudden our communication became much better. And we went, holy shit, this could really work. We did that so long that it basically became one of the core tenement pieces of our company. And when people join our company now, oftentimes it's because they go, I love the way the communication is. The way that you guys communicate, the way that you guys show respect to each other, the way that you guys take ego out of the process and you focus it so much on this clear vision, that's something I want to be a part of, right? This criteria-based culture that came from that criteria-based communication is how we got, senior programming leads from Riot Games to quit their jobs, work for us for a year for free, and give us $50,000 just so they could be a part of it, right? It's one of the things that positive culture does. Basically, it was game design methods as applied to employees. If people aren't buying into your systems of communication and collaboration, remember, you gotta look for blame in yourself and your systems before applying it elsewhere. That's something that we do very well in game design, right? We don't blame the player, right? We don't say, oh, the player's an idiot because he's not using all of these tools in this sidebar. We go, okay, the sidebar isn't accessible, or the UI needs a rework, or we need to change how the player's interacting with these systems. But the funny thing is we kind of don't do that with employees. We say, oh, well, we gave them all of the things and they'll just figure it out. But most employees don't, right? They're in a lot of ways very similar to actual gamers. They're going to only use the systems that they have to advance in their quest, or that are very clearly showcased as being things that they want to participate in over and over and over again. You have to be very patient. So this is the short version of criteria-based game design / communication. So you'll read it, it's going to look a lot like a game design method, because that's what it was originally created as, but it's also one of the key ways that we communicate. You explore the problem space. We have a space and we call it, okay, I need to meet you. I've got a problem that I'm trying to solve. Let's meet in the problem space. Discuss what the problem is. Even more importantly, discuss what the problem is not. That's a step that so many people skip, and it leads to tons of miscommunication. Because you say, we got to do something about the jumping that happens with this unit. I think you're talking about the art, and you're talking about the mechanics, and we have an hour and a half where we're yelling at each other. And then finally, after an hour and a half, we realized that we waste a lot of time because we were talking about two totally different things. Discuss what the problem is not. Set criteria. List what success should achieve, prioritize those goals, right? So one of the next steps that we take is we say, okay, so here's the problem, we agree on what the problem is, now let's talk about what a solution would look like. Not what the solution is, but if a solution accomplished A, B, C, D, and E, we would consider it as addressing the core issues that are causing this problem, right? Then you explore the solution space. Brainstorm wild ideas, go back and forth. Treat incomplete ideas as mulch, fertilizer to grow other better ideas out of. Never give someone flack for throwing out really bad ideas or things that only address one point of criteria, or even just things they go, you know, I was also thinking about this. Just be like, great, throw it out on the table. We'll keep talking about it. Revise the criteria if you need. If you're talking about solutions and you realize, oh, you know what, we missed some things. Go back to the criteria and adjust it a little bit. That's something, sometimes when we talk about, I also do a presentation on criteria-based game design that really focuses on the game design aspects. People sometimes come away from it thinking that criteria are these holy grails that you made up one time and then you can never touch again. No, that's stupid. You learn more through the process, and you need to always be willing to update and improve them. Refer to proposed solutions by given name, not who came up with them. This was actually a big part for the game design process, but it also really helped us in our personal communication. You say, okay, let's talk about the idea of giving the Phoenix a different attack animation, and now let's talk about the pros and cons of changing the Phoenix's speed and fire trail or something like that. Don't assign them to specific people, because as soon as you do that, then you're forcing kind of a battle of winner loser. Hybridize solutions if necessary. Don't just be like this idea or that idea. Say, okay, there might be some value from both of these ideas. And especially if you take the solutions away from the individual that initially spoke it, then generally that ends up happening anyway. Measure those solutions. Rank solutions based on how well they fulfill that criteria. And adjust ranking based on testability, right? This comes heavily from iterative game design. If there are two solutions, they're both pretty good. One of them we can test with a pen and paper in like 2 hours, and the other one we got to build a month-long build. You always test the pen and paper one first, even if it's actually not quite as good of a solution. It'll just be more data points that you can use when you actually have to do a more expensive or more extensive solution. And in terms of communication, this is also something we did when we're trying to solve problems within the company. We're talking about ways to design that culture. Ask team members to list the pros and cons of solutions. Anytime somebody throws out an idea initially, you know, make sure that in that space you go, okay, what are the pros and cons of that? Write them down. Have other people also shout out some pros and cons. Test. Choose how you will measure if the solution is succeeding. Really critical. Otherwise you go, yeah, we tested it. And it's like, okay, what did you find? Well, we think it was good. Okay, well, what were the criteria for if it achieves these results, then it succeeds, right? Break the implementation of those solutions in tasks. Volunteer or assign those tasks to individuals, assign due dates. This is straightforward stuff. You know all this. So it looks very much like a game design process, but we also ended up using it for most communication issues that we had between senior leadership and the rest of the team. So that led to, as we started to implement those solutions, taking the ego out of conflicts, making sure that every single senior executive was showing patience and constantly asking employees when they came up and said, okay, we've got a problem. You say, okay, let's talk about it. Explain to me all of the aspects. Doing very active listening. I'll talk about active listening in a second. It started to lead to a few fundamental truths within our company that effectively became beacons of our culture. Things like everyone has value, their ideas have value, and their feelings have value. Ego is like fire. Controlled and shaped, it can make beautiful art, but out of control, it will burn down your company, right? We really focused a lot in that process, and with, I mean, all of the creative types like game designers and artists, there's a lot of ego, and we said, if we suppress the ego, we're suppressing some of that creativity. Instead, we said we have to invest that ego in the process of getting the best possible solution, right? Explain things to people, show them their ideas are valuable, and show them through thoughtful explanation that they can trust you. That's like the example I gave earlier. And we came up with our company slogan, which was better games, better communities by design. Okay, a couple quick tips, lightning round. Place pride in the process, not a specific solution. Model effective behavior. Appreciate correction. This is one that's really hard for senior management to get because somebody did the Jedi mind trick on us about 8,000 years ago, that if you're in a position of power, you can never apologize or show weakness or say, I was wrong. Instead, thank you. Okay, 15 minutes. I'll try to speed up through this last bit. But it's really, really critical. You cannot expect your employees to be introspective and looking to grow if their leaders are not doing the same. So every time an employee corrects me, I go, thank you so much. I was completely wrong about that, and you've helped me grow. And I really appreciate that feedback, especially when it comes to communication. That's where it hits employees the hardest and where you can model the most positive, effective behavior. Praise the team for success, right? Always make sure that it's about the team. And then a couple of quotes that you should practice saying to do criteria-based communication. Let me repeat your position back to you to see if I understand. So, so valuable. That way you can try to articulate the other person's point of view, and even if you continue to disagree with it, they feel heard, which is the key point of tension, generally, when you have an argument. Ask, what problem are you trying to solve? Incredibly, incredibly valuable. I have seen so many communication fights get diffused by asking that question, right? Because it really clarifies what the actual issue is to all parties, and it shows that both of you are on the same team working for the same result. Something about this solution feels wrong to me. Help me unearth it, right? That's a great way of coming up to someone saying, instead of just saying, that idea sucks, I hate your face, you say, something about this feels wrong, help me unearth it. In other words, you show me, because maybe it's your idea or you have deeper understanding, help me try to understand maybe where I'm feeling wrong. That way, you guys are a collaborative team trying to solve that person's problem together, and the person that you are going to with your problem gets the first opportunity to try to find problems in their own idea. Active listening, such a game changer. Okay, quick thing on active listening, because this is such a critical thing that we do very poorly as just people in general. So think about the way that you normally interact with people in terms of listening, right? Generally, when we're having conversation, if we're all out at a bar together, we are constantly half listening to the conversation and half thinking about how we can participate, right? As we are listening, we're listening for trigger words. If I want to tell you a story about the time that my football went over the fence and I went in to retrieve it and got chased by my neighbor's dog, maybe I start telling it, you hear the word football and you say, oh, I used to be Pele's neighbor. And then me, because I'm polite, I'm like, oh, like, he used to play in New York. Did you live in New York? And you're like, actually, I'm originally from Brazil. And I'm like, oh, I thought you were from Germany. And my story about telling a funny story about getting chased by my neighbor's dog becomes your whole family genealogical history, right? And that's what we constantly do, right? That's the way we interact generally with our families. I mean, if you try to do true active listening with your friends at a bar or something, you will never say a word. Try it sometime. It's actually pretty funny how we never do it. But in a company, it's so valuable, right? So actively listen. Wait for the entire statement that the other person says, and then take a break and say, okay, I'm going to try to repeat this back to you, see if I really understand it. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, give me a second to think about my response. Okay, here's my response. If you do it like that, it's going to change your life. Be real about your shortcomings. Senior management, we're terrible at it. I was terrible at it. I'm still not perfect at it. Honesty, respect, celebration of failure within the system. Always accept responsibility from the top. Apologizing is a sign of strength, not weakness. Place your pride in becoming right, not in being thought of as right. That is such a that was from one of my co-founders. He said that, and I was like, that is spun gold, my man. That is spun gold, because that is a great way to think about your own personal progress. So you got a feedback loop that's kind of similar to a gameplay feedback loop. Known goals, your quest, meaningful choices, it has to matter. You have to have some authority in that journey. Results, and seeing the impact of your work. That feedback loop is the core thing that your employees want. And it's one of the core things that your communication should have. And it's also one of the core things you should have in your game design. It's very, very similar. Oh, this is a quote from our creative director, Dylan Kahn, who also had problems with communication right at the beginning, as did I, for very similar reasons. We both came from cultures within our families where we were so afraid of being wrong, and using this system really, really helped us break out of that, and we're really grateful for that. Okay, that's the end of it. I know I've only got like 5 minutes left, but I'll take a couple of questions from you guys if you want. This is just some key statements and kind of a summary of it, so you can look over that as well. Thanks, guys.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation. And how these rules work for written communication? For example, on Slack, Discord, I don't know which channel do you use, but how does it apply to written communication?
It gives itself very, very well to written communication because when you come into oftentimes written communication is one of the best ways to address problems. Right? In our company, oftentimes, if you see a major issue, we write it out rather than having a direct conversation. One of the advantages to that is it's non-emotional, right? So if you feel very strongly about something, oftentimes you can't complain about it without getting a little bit animated, and that can inherently put people on the defensive. So actually writing out your problem is often a very good way of bringing it up. And if you do that, just use very similar terms and phrases, right? Say, hey, I've got a problem that I'm trying to solve, right? I feel strongly that these things here and here and here are issues. I know that these ideas came from these two people. I would love to have a conversation with them so they can help me work through it and so that I can understand better where they're coming from and so that we can address this problem together. And then you can have, we often call it forum in our company, where sometimes you say, I need forum on this issue, and that means like I need a space where I'm not trying to attack something, but I want to kind of stand in the Roman forum and be heard. I need an opportunity to be heard on this issue because I feel very strongly about it. And then we say, okay, who needs to attend? And you say, I need these 3 people to attend. And we say, okay, next Tuesday at 10 a.m., you have forum on this issue. And then you have the opportunity to go into the process. But we do it all the time going back and forth, where oftentimes we mostly use Discord in our company for internal communications. And you'll just say, okay, here are the problems I'm trying to solve. Here are the core criteria as I see them inherently. Feel free to add some more to what I think a solution needs to address. And I'm going to create this specific thread to start brainstorming solutions. And then if somebody wants to have a conversation with me about it, we can have that, or we can just kind of solve it in the text. So I find that it actually works quite similarly. It's about using very similar phrasing. Yeah. That makes sense?
Okay, thank you. We need to end.
Yeah, what time is it? Oh, yeah, okay, clear. All right, thank you so much, guys. You've been great. Hope you have a great day.